They were supposed to find termites. Instead, the wall whispered a name. The hammer struck old plaster just after sunrise. One clean hit. A hollow sound. Then something fell out. Light, brittle, not wood. When it hit the floor, it didn't bounce. It cracked. A man bent down and picked it up. It was a scrap of pine board, no wider than a hand. On it, carved carefully with a blade long gone dull, was a name. Not painted. Not written. Carved. Eleanor Mayfield. 1834. The room went quiet. Outside, cicadas screamed in the heat, but inside the plantation house, every sound felt swallowed. The workers stood frozen, dust clinging to their sweat, staring at something that should not exist. Then another board slid out. Then another. Dozens. All of them carved. All of them names. Some with dates. Some without. Some scratched so deeply the wood had split. This was supposed to be a restoration project, a historical preservation effort funded by a state grant. The goal was simple: stabilize the structure, open it for tours, tell a polite version of history. But the house had other plans. Because once the walls were opened, they didn't stop giving things back. Behind the plaster were cavities no blueprint mentioned, narrow spaces between studs, sealed deliberately. And inside those spaces, names. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children. No records matched them. No graves bore them. And the deeper the workers went, the more the house seemed to respond. Floorboards creaking with no weight on them, doors swelling shut, the smell of old iron and rot seeping from nowhere. One worker quit on the spot. He said the walls were warm. Another claimed he heard breathing. By the end of the week, the site was shut down. By the end of the month, 2 men were dead. And the plantation, officially abandoned since 1912, was suddenly remembered by something that never forgot. The land was called Briar Hollow Plantation. Official records say it was founded in 1819. Cotton, tobacco, a river nearby, a church on the hill, a main house built too large for the family that lived in it. What records don't say is why the plantation never truly closed. When the Civil War ended, Briar Hollow didn't burn like others. It didn't fall into ruin. Ownership transferred quietly. Labor changed names. The work continued. By 1870, it was no longer listed as a plantation. It was listed as a private agricultural institute. By 1892, the census described it as a residential training home. And by 1905, the word agriculture disappeared entirely. What replaced it was vague, purposefully vague. Local newspapers referred to it as a place for troubled youth. Church bulletins praised it for moral correction. Families from 3 counties sent children there. Orphans, runaways, the unwanted. Some came back. Most didn't. The house expanded during this period. New wings, new walls, new rooms without windows. Construction that made no architectural sense unless the goal wasn't comfort, but containment. Former townspeople would later recall that the plantation never slept. Lamps burned all night. Bells rang at odd hours. Wagons arrived after dark and left before dawn. No one asked questions. The church on the hill oversaw everything. The same 3 families served as trustees for over 70 years. Fathers passed titles to sons. Pastors rotated in and out, but the rules never changed. Briar Hollow was not a place. It was a system, and systems don't need to be remembered. They only need to keep working until someone breaks the wall. When historians were finally allowed inside, they brought notebooks, gloves, and cameras. What they didn't bring was an explanation. The names found inside the walls didn't match death records. They didn't match census lists. They didn't appear in church registries. It was as if these people had lived just long enough to be carved and then erased. Some boards had multiple names, layered on top of each other. When one ran out of space, another was added. The handwriting changed. The depth of the cuts changed. Some were neat, almost careful. Others looked desperate, letters jagged, uneven, cutting through knots in the wood like the person carving didn't care if the blade broke. Many names were followed by symbols. A triangle, a circle with a slash, a mark that looked like an eye, unfinished. No one could agree what they meant. In one sealed section behind the east wing staircase, they found a wall made entirely of boards like this. Hundreds of them, stacked vertically, nailed from the inside. You would have to be in the wall to build it. And someone had been. On the back of one board, written faintly in charcoal, were 4 words. "We are still learning." That night, the lead archivist refused to stay on site. She said the house felt crowded. Not haunted, occupied. A graduate student reported hearing children reciting something under their breath, just beyond hearing range. When he followed the sound, it stopped. Every time. The house was not replaying memories. It was continuing a process. The church records were pristine. Too pristine. Every baptism, every sermon, every donation recorded in perfect handwriting. But the years between 1860 and 1910 showed something strange. Names appeared in the margins, then vanished in later copies. Edited out. Corrected. Sanitized. The church oversaw Briar Hollow's residents. Confession logs referenced disciplinary measures. Sermons preached obedience as survival. Silence as salvation. One repeated phrase appeared in sermon drafts never meant for public reading. The body resists. The name remains. Former clergy families refused interviews. Some still lived nearby. Some had descendants who worked in local government. One elderly woman finally spoke, off record, trembling, eyes fixed on the floor. She said her grandfather had been a caretaker. She said he drank himself to death. And she said he used to pray out loud at night, begging forgiveness for locking the walls before the lesson was finished. When asked what lesson, she refused to answer. When asked who was being taught, she began to cry. Because some buildings are not meant to educate. They are meant to correct. And Briar Hollow corrected people by removing their names from the world, then carving them into the walls, where they could never leave. Behind the main staircase, past a door that never appeared on any blueprint, was a hallway that didn't feel finished. The walls were smooth but uneven, like they had been sealed in a hurry. The air was colder there. Not damp, still, as if it had been waiting. This was the orphan wing. No windows. No fireplaces. No decorations. Just rows of narrow rooms with iron hooks bolted into the walls and shallow grooves carved into the floorboards, worn smooth by repetition. Each room had a number burned above the door. No names. Just numbers. Historians found small things first. Buttons. Shoes worn down at the heel. Wooden toys with no paint left on them. All of it tucked into corners, hidden behind loose boards, like someone had tried to save pieces of themselves. On one wall, scratched so faintly, it almost vanished under the plaster, were height markings. But they stopped abruptly. None went past 4.5 feet. Records said children stayed at Briar Hollow until adulthood. But the walls told a different story. They didn't grow here. They were processed. And the deeper investigators went into the wing, the more they noticed something disturbing. Certain rooms had been reinforced. Extra studs. Thicker walls. Smaller spaces. Rooms inside rooms. Places meant to hold sound. A ledger was found in a locked cabinet beneath the chapel floor. It wasn't a diary. It was a schedule. Times listed down the page. Names replaced with numbers. Instructions written in calm, patient handwriting. Midnight, recitation. 1:15, correction. 2 o'clock, silence. Over and over. Margins were filled with notes. Subject resists. Voice remains strong. Increased duration. This wasn't punishment. It was training. Former town residents recalled bells ringing at night. They said it was prayer. They said it was routine. But no church holds services every night at the same hour for decades. And no prayer requires locked doors. One page in the ledger had been torn out. In its place, someone had written a warning. If they remember their names, start again. That was when the purpose of the carved boards became clear. Names weren't memorials. They were trophies. Proof that the system had worked. During demolition of the East Wing, workers broke through a sealed cavity and found something that stopped the entire project. Human remains. Not buried. Not laid to rest. Positioned. The skeleton was seated upright between the studs, knees drawn to the chest, arms wrapped around the legs. The skull tilted slightly upward, jaw open, as if listening. Carved into the surrounding boards were names, dozens of them, spiraling outward from the body. The bones belonged to a woman in her early 20s. Her teeth were worn down unnaturally, as if she had been grinding them for years. Her hands showed deep grooves in the finger bones. She had been carving long after her nails were gone. Etched into the wood directly in front of her face was a sentence, cut deeper than any other. I kept them quiet. No missing person matched her description. No burial record existed. But the position of her body told a story no document could. She had been placed there to listen, to monitor, to make sure the children followed the rules when no one else was watching. And when she could no longer do that, They sealed her in. People always ask why no one ran. The answer is simple. They didn't need locks. They used belief. Children were told the outside world was dead, that families who sent them here had failed, that names were dangerous things, anchors to pain. They were taught new words, new prayers, new rhythms. And when someone broke, when they cried for home or said their old name out loud, the correction began. Isolation, darkness, recitation until the voice failed. The goal wasn't obedience. It was erasure. By the time someone could leave, there was nothing left to return. No name, no memory, no self, only the house. And the house kept everything. Even now, locals say Briar Hollow feels crowded, that voices carry strangely near the ruins, that children's shoes sometimes appear on the road after heavy rain. The restoration project never resumed. Officially, the site is unstable. Unofficially, no one wants to open the walls again. Because Part 2 ends where the truth becomes unavoidable. Briar Hollow didn't hide its victims underground. It built them into itself. Hidden behind the chapel's pulpit was a crawl space so narrow an adult had to slide in sideways. Inside, carved directly into the brick, was a prayer. Not written in ink. Scratched with something sharp. It wasn't a prayer asking for forgiveness. It was a set of instructions. Line by line, it described how a person should speak until their voice no longer sounded like their own. How repetition strips meaning from words. How exhaustion opens the mind. At the bottom, one sentence was underlined again and again. A name is a door. Close it. Church sermons from the late 1800s suddenly made sense. They weren't religious teachings. They were preparation. Congregants were taught that identity was sinful, that obedience required surrendering the self, that children were blank vessels needing correction. Briar Hollow wasn't an abuse hidden from the church. It was theology made physical. And the house was its instrument. There was one room the workers avoided after sunset. It sat beneath the orphan wing, accessible only through a trapdoor sealed with rusted hinges. No windows, no ventilation, just stone walls polished smooth by sound. This was where recitation happened. When investigators tested acoustics, they found something wrong. Voices didn't echo. They layered. Even a whisper stayed, stacking over itself until the air felt thick, heavy, crowded. This room was designed to trap words. Former records referred to it as the chamber of reflection. But reflection implies return. Nothing returned from here. Children were brought down in groups, forced to repeat prayers, numbers, commands, sometimes for hours, sometimes until only breathing remained. One scratched message near the floor read, "If you stop, they hear you." No one knows who they were, but everyone agrees the room listened. In 1908, Briar Hollow experienced what records call a containment failure. That's all it says. No explanation. No cause. But local newspapers from the same week mention a strange event. Bells ringing non-stop through the night. Dogs howling. A fire seen from miles away, then suddenly gone. When morning came, smoke hung low over the property, but nothing had burned. 3 staff members disappeared. So did 17 children. Their names were never listed. But new boards appeared inside the walls. More than ever before. Carved hastily. Sloppily. Some names overlapping, unfinished, misspelled. Something had gone wrong. And the system responded the only way it knew how. By feeding the house. The walls weren't hiding evidence. They were storing pressure. Every name carved was an attempt to contain something that refused to stay quiet. Every sealed cavity acted like a plug, holding sound, memory, and presence inside the structure. The house became layered with voices. Not ghosts. Records. Living impressions trapped in wood and plaster. This explains why workers felt warmth. Why rooms felt occupied. Why sound behaved strangely. The house wasn't haunted. It was overloaded. And when too many names accumulated, the structure had to expand. New wings. New walls. New chambers. The house grew the way a body does, by absorbing. The final recorded sermon at Briar Hollow was never delivered publicly. It was found folded inside a wall. The handwriting was shaky. Panicked. The pastor wrote about losing control. About children speaking in unison. About names being spoken out loud without mouths. One line stood out. They are remembering each other. That night, Briar Hollow was officially closed. The church declared the site unsafe. The children were relocated. No destinations were listed. The building was sealed. And silence returned. But silence doesn't mean empty. It means waiting. The restoration team believed they were fixing rot. They replaced beams, reinforced floors, opened walls that hadn't seen light in over a century. Every cut they made loosened something that had been holding. Within days, workers reported headaches, nosebleeds, a deep pressure behind the eyes that didn't fade after leaving the site. Electronic tools malfunctioned only in certain rooms. Batteries drained fast. Recorders picked up low murmurs no one could hear in real time. Then the voices started appearing on playback. Not words at first, just breath, layered breathing, dozens of them, always out of sync. The foreman shut down night work after a security camera captured something impossible, doors opening inward where no hinges existed. The house wasn't collapsing. It was rearranging. One worker refused to leave. He said the house made sense to him, that he understood the layout better the longer he stayed. He stopped using maps. He said the halls showed him where to go. On the fifth night, he slept inside. At 3:12 a.m., motion sensors activated across multiple wings at once. Footsteps overlapped, too many to count. When they found him the next morning, he was inside a wall cavity that had been sealed the day before. Alive, sitting upright, hands pressed flat against the wood. His mouth was bleeding. He kept repeating one sentence. I was helping them remember. He never explained who they were. After that, the state pulled funding. The project was officially terminated. But the damage was done. Locals began hearing bells again. Not from the old church. It had collapsed decades earlier. The sound came from the plantation grounds themselves. Low, distant, always at night. People reported dreams they hadn't had since childhood. Dreams of being called by a name they didn't recognize. Dreams of rooms with no doors. One woman claimed her son started carving symbols into his desk at school. Symbols that matched those found in the walls. When asked where he learned them, he said, "They showed me." Names began appearing where they shouldn't. Scratched into bathroom mirrors. Etched into car doors near the property. Written in condensation on windows. None matched modern residents. They were old. Forgotten. But they were coming back. A historian reviewing the carved boards noticed something new. Fresh cuts overlaying old ones. As if the walls were being updated. The house was no longer sealed. It was exporting. Briar Hollow was never about cruelty alone. It was about control through forgetting. Erase names. Erase identity. Replace it with obedience. But memory doesn't die. It compresses. And when released, it doesn't whisper. It floods. The system that built the house believed silence was permanent. They were wrong. They mistook containment for erasure. And now the house was correcting them. For months after the shutdown, Briar Hollow sat untouched. No guards. No lights. No fences that stayed intact. But people kept coming anyway. Not tourists. Locals who felt pulled there for reasons they couldn't explain. People who dreamed of narrow rooms. People who woke up with names on their tongues that didn't belong to them. One man drove 3 hours because he kept hearing a woman whisper, "Say it again." When he reached the plantation ruins, he collapsed at the front steps and began reciting names he had never learned. Historians finally understood something terrifying. The names weren't asking for revenge. They weren't asking for justice. They were asking for completion. At Briar Hollow, names were taken but never released. Memory was stripped but never allowed to finish its work. The people inside the walls were suspended, neither forgotten nor remembered. And memory, when trapped too long, becomes pressure. The house didn't want to be destroyed. It wanted to be heard. A sealed envelope was discovered during a final archival sweep. Inside was a handwritten note from an unknown church official, dated 1912, the year Briar Hollow closed. It read, "We believed we were removing sin, but we were teaching the building to listen. It knows us now. That is why Briar Hollow cannot be torn down. Not because of history, because the structure is no longer just wood and stone. It is an archive of erased lives. Every name inside the walls is still mid-sentence. And if the house comes down, those names don't disappear. They scatter. Today, Briar Hollow is classified as a restricted historical site. No restoration. No demolition. Just quiet monitoring. Yet visitors still report sounds. Soft recitation carried on the wind. Not screams. Not cries. Names. Being spoken to stay real. Because the final horror of Briar Hollow isn't what happened there. It's what happens when no one listens. The house remembers. And now, so do we.